Welcome into One of One Sports. Today we're going to be doing some buy, sell, hold on some college football teams. Just to preface this before we go, this is not indicative of what I think of the team as a whole. This is more of how I see the future playing out for the team, kind of like a stock, right? So if I'm selling on a team, it doesn't mean I think they're bad, but it means I think, say they're ranked 15th now, I think they're probably going to be moving downwards. That could be based on schedule. If they have really hard teams playing, it could be based on a lot of different things. Which I'll explain more as I go along with it. But just want to say it doesn't necessarily mean these are who I think the good teams are, the bad teams are. And you'll see what I mean in a second. So we can just get right into it. I think it'll make sense as we go along. All right, so the first group of teams we have here, three ACC teams, North Carolina, Syracuse, and Clemson. And this is what I mean by it's not indicative of how good I think the team is. North Carolina, I don't really think is that good. In the preseason, I thought it'd be a pretty good team. But I saw him play Minnesota, wasn't really impressed. Their quarterback goes down with injury. But the reason I have them as a buy here is I don't think anyone's talking about North Carolina, right? I think you're flying pretty under the radar, and I think for good reason. You beat Minnesota by 2, and then you beat North Carolina Central, and then you also beat Charlotte, two teams who aren't very good. No one's like, oh, you got to look out for North Carolina. And they've had 3 different quarterbacks play at this point. You had Max Johnson play week 1. He gets hurt. Harrell plays week 2. And then Jacoby Criswell plays in week 3, I believe. So I'm not sure if they're going with Harrell or if they're going with Criswell from here on out. But my point is, I don't think it really matters. If we take a look at the schedule here, the next week you got home against James Madison. Then you got a road game against Duke, who I think's looked pretty bad this year. I don't think Malik Murphy's looked very good. And then you have a home game against Pitt. So I think those are 3 extremely winnable games. And if we're in here at like week 7 or week 8, whatever it is, I think it's week 7, and North Carolina's 6-0 with home games against Georgia Tech, and then road games against Virginia, and then a bye, and then Florida State on the road. So Florida State, obviously very bad right now. Georgia Tech's a home game that's winnable. At Virginia. Virginia, I think, is a little bit underrated, but still winnable game. I mean, we could be looking at another year where UNC starts 7-1 or 7-2, 8-1, 6-0, that kind of thing that they've done the past few years, and then they tend to taper off. But even the end of the schedule with Wake, Boston College, and NC State, more difficult, I would think, because I think Boston College and NC State are pretty solid, especially if NC State's healthy at the end of the year. But I think it's a team that, even though I'm not sure how good they are, I think you're going to see them climb up in the AP poll because I think they'll just find a way to win a lot of, winnable games. And then for the next team I have is Syracuse. I think they're actually probably a little bit better than North Carolina right now. Kyle McCord has looked great. They're still unranked, but I mean, I think they're just an underrated team right now in general. Gadsden's a great weapon for them, and I was impressed with how they played against Georgia Tech. And this is another team where their next 2 games, home against Stanford this Friday, and then a home game against Holy Cross. Fully expect them to be 4-0. And then the tough part at UNLV, at NC State. Little dicey, right? Because UNLV they just beat Kansas. I think they beat Houston as well. So I think they've already beaten 2 Power 4 teams, both from the Big 12. But they could get another with a home game against Syracuse. So that's one to look out for. And then depending on how NC State's looking, is Grayson McCall playing? Is the team, because I mean, I've been disappointed by them this year, but I still think they have the talent to be a really good team. But over these next 3 weeks, I could see Syracuse getting to 5-0. And then Clemson, I think I've made a video on Clemson after they lost to Georgia that I was buying Clemson stock because, I mean, Georgia's just the best team in the country, and there's no Georgia left on Clemson's schedule. I mean, and so like if they were playing more teams like Georgia, sure, I'd be worried about Clemson, but they're not. They're playing the rest of the ACC. And that's really the main reason why I'm buying these teams is because I think Miami, clear-cut the best team in the ACC right now. But people are going to want to find who's going to compete with Miami. So Clemson's going to be there because I think they're going to dominate teams. And then North Carolina and Syracuse, I think, are going to emerge. I was tempted to put Louisville here, but they have a couple of tough games, like the road game against Notre Dame concerns me a little bit. But if we see Syracuse and North Carolina get to like 6-0, and we're like, oh, are North Carolina, Syracuse, playoff contenders? I could see that discussion emerging because the ACC looks weak and people see, oh, they're still undefeated in week 7 or something, and they have manageable schedules, and they're looking for who's going to compete with Miami And then Clemson, I think, is just a really good team that just had a bad week one playing the best team in the country. So that's the reason I'm buying all these teams. Now we can move on to who I'm selling. So first two teams I'm selling, and instead you can see they're kind of groups here. This is kind of like those surprise 3-0 teams that I think are going to fall off. I also considered putting ASU into this tier, but I'm a little bit more impressed by ASU, but like hesitantly because I'm not sure how good the teams they played are. But just eye test wise, I've been a little bit more impressed. Even in the Texas State game where they struggled, I saw some good signs, and also I think their schedule is pretty workable. Same with Pitt. Like, I don't think Pitt's good at all. I think they should be 1-2, but still a workable schedule in the ACC. So those were teams I considered in this category. But the reason Michigan State and BYU make it here is just looking at the schedule, right? So Michigan State starts off, what are they now? Are they 2-0 or are they 3-0? Let me pull it up real quick. But so they start off undefeated so far. Yeah, so they're 3-0. And I don't think they've looked that good. I watched them play Florida Atlantic. Not that impressed. Then Maryland, I thought was going to beat them. I was a little surprised they won, but Childs played really well, which is a good sign. And then obviously they crushed Prairie View. But now looking at the schedule, next 3 games, at Boston College, then Ohio State, then at Oregon. I think that's 3 losses. I mean, that's just brutal. And then Iowa, and then Michigan. So the next 5 games, like, they're 3-0 now. I think some people might think, oh, maybe they could pull an upset or something. But I think this could be, I see at least 4 losses coming up. So that's the reason, like, I'm selling them. I think they might actually be decent. I think they're better than I thought they would be coming the preseason. I think I picked them to go like 6-6. But 3-0 start. I thought they would have lost the Maryland game. So it's better than I thought they would start. But the schedule ahead's just too tough that I got to sell stock in them. And then BYU, not as tough as Michigan State because the Ohio State and Oregon thing in a row is just brutal. But coming up, you're going to have Kansas State at home this weekend. You could win it, but that's obviously a very tough game. Then a road game against Baylor, I think, is tough. Then Arizona and Oklahoma State, I think, are both good teams. Then you have at UCF and at Utah. Like, I think the schedule just gets really difficult for BYU. And just in general, the games they have are just going to be too tough. So even though these teams have surprised so far and have been better than I expected, I think you got to sell on them, and they're going to not fall back down to earth because I think they're better than we thought, or at least better than I thought. But they still got too hard of a schedule to perform very well, at least in my opinion. We'll see if that turns out to be true. Now moving on, we can do some teams that I'm going to hold out on. This for 2 different reasons. First, Oklahoma, I'm holding out I think I want to buy into them, and I think most people would disagree with that, and I'm kind of holding out because I think things could go, there's a world where things go very badly this weekend against Tennessee, and it becomes clear that Oklahoma's, not a top level team, and if that's true, the schedule's not lightening up. They're going to have Alabama, they're going to have Texas, so Alabama and Texas as well. So if I'm wrong about them, then it would be like a really bad take to have. So that's why I'm holding out on Oklahoma. But I do believe in them. It's just it's tough because you want to call it before the Tennessee game, and I do think they'll beat Tennessee. But if they lose to Tennessee, I mean, I think it could go downhill. And so it's kind of the opposite though for USC. Kind of funny with these 2 teams here, the whole Lincoln Riley thing. But USC, I think everyone's buying in. And I'm a little more skeptical. I think LSU is a little bit overrated, and I said this in the preseason. I didn't rank them preseason top 25. I picked them to go 7-5, and I think they're clearly not dominant run team, which helped USC look better on defense. And then Utah State's still not very good and didn't try to run the ball as much. And with Michigan, especially with the quarterback change, putting in Orji instead of Warren, there's going to be there's going to be a heavy dose of running the football, and this is going to be USC's first real challenge against a team that's just fully committed to that because Michigan can't do anything else. Like if USC stops the run game, it'll be great and they'll clearly win, but Michigan has to stick with it because they can't win any other way. And I'm still skeptical USC can actually handle that. I think they're a very good team, but I think a lot of people want to elevate them to like top 10 status, maybe Big 10 contender, maybe playoff contender, and I'm not there yet, and I'm still holding out on that. So those are the teams I'm holding, and now we can get back to some more stocks. So I'm buying Arizona and Iowa State. These are teams I think can emerge as Big 12 contenders, right? So I think right now people are looking at it like Kansas State, Utah, Oklahoma State. I think at least is who's ranked the top three. I also considered putting UCF into this group as another team that could emerge. But I think the Big 12 is still so tightly contested that a lot of teams could emerge as playoff contenders. But these are the two I went with. I think Arizona's still a really good team. I think it's just the road Friday night game against Kansas State was a really tough spot. I think coming off the bye, they're going to bounce back. I look for them to actually pull an upset against Utah and then kind of get on a roll going forward. So I think they'll emerge as a top contender in the Big 12. And then Iowa State, I think I've been impressed with how they looked against Iowa. I think Rocco Beck's very good. I think they got good weapons. And the next few games, Arkansas State, Houston, and Baylor, I think all very winnable. And overall, it's just a workable schedule for them, especially compared to some of the other Big 12 teams. So I like them as well to compete. And then I'll continue this on the next slide, actually. But the reason I didn't include UCF, who I have been impressed with, I thought TCU was going to get them. I just think I do see like kind of a ceiling on UCF because I think they rely a little bit too much on the run game. And when a team stops the run game, I could see them becoming a little bit limited. Not badly. I think I still have them going like 8-4, 9-3, something like that. Just wasn't quite as confident in them as these two teams right here. And then continuing this thought with the team I'm selling next, that's the Oklahoma State Cowboys. Part of the reason I have Arizona and Iowa State emerging, I think Oklahoma State's going to fall back kind of out of that group, at least in the next couple of weeks. And that's because you've got Utah and you got Kansas State next, the two teams that are kind of considered along with Oklahoma State to be the top of the Big 12. I think they're ranked 12, 13, and 14 in the AP poll, which is kind of lazy. But that's what the AP's done. But Oklahoma State, I'm really concerned with because they haven't. The whole point of Oklahoma State, you have the super veteran offensive line. You're going to be super physical. You've one of the best, if not the best, running back in the country in Ollie Gordon. You're going to be able to run the ball. And they just haven't really been able to do it. And they've had to rely on Alan Bowman. And he's actually been good so far. Hasn't turned the ball over too much. I've been impressed with him. I just don't think he can keep it up. And I think with two really good teams who I do consider to be the top of the Big 12 right now in Utah, Kansas State, I don't think it bodes well for Oklahoma State that they haven't established a run game. I think it's very possible, I'd say even likely, they lose their next two. And then once you go lose your first two in conference play, that's when the stock drops, right? That's when people are kind of writing you off. You're like, oh, 2 conference losses to start off conference play is a really rough spot. So that's why I'm selling on Oklahoma State. And then Illinois, I'm selling on as well because, one, I just want to say, like, shout out to Illinois. They just became ranked in the AP poll, which I did not see coming this year. But this is another team where it's the schedule. This weekend, they got a road game against Nebraska on a Friday. I don't like the spot at all. The road Friday night game is just tough. Then you have at Penn State. Then you get Purdue, which isn't – you get a bye and then Purdue. But then you have Michigan and Oregon. So 4 of your next 5 games are against ranked teams, 3 of which are on the road. So even though you got a really good win against Kansas so far this year, how good is Kansas really after they lost to UNLV? You start 3-0, that's great, but it's even impressive. I think 4 of your next 5 are going to be really hard to win, and it's likely you go from 3-0 to like 4-4, and now you're nowhere near the AP poll, and that's why I'm selling on Illinois. You guys let me know, who are you buying, who are you selling, what takes do you believe in for the coming weeks of this college football season. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time.